chipped sickle hissed dryly as it sliced through the stunted wheat stalks. Amos did not straighten up. His back had locked into a permanent curve, a question mark of flesh and bone set against the cracked Galilean earth. Sweat streamed from his forehead, traversing deep wrinkles like dry irrigation ditches, before pooling and stinging the corners of his eyes. He raised a rough, frayed sleeve to wipe his face, but it only served to plaster the mud more firmly onto his tanned skin. Beneath his feet, the soil was no longer soil. It was a hostile entity, hard as stone and hot as a kiln. The fissures gaped like open mouths, waiting for a rain that the Judean sky had refused to grant for months on end. Amos looked at the handful of wheat he had just cut. The grains were tiny, shriveled, and gray as hearth ash. They lacked the swollen belly of life. They were merely the soulless carcasses of hope. He used a calloused thumb to press hard on a grain. It crumbled into a tasteless white powder, leaving no significant starch behind. "Is that all of it?" Ruth's voice came from behind him, thin as the wind whistling through a rock crevice. Amos didn't turn around. He knew his wife was standing there, clutching an empty basket, a basket that should have been overflowing at this time of the harvest season. He could feel her gaze boring into the meager pile of wheat at his feet. "The land has said all there is to say," Amos replied, his voice raspy from dust and dehydration. He picked up a small stone and hurled it toward the boundary of the field. The stone landed on a higher ridge of earth, where an old stone marker had been half uprooted. That was the beginning of the 2 acres he had lost to a Roman creditor 2 years ago, simply because he couldn't pay enough tributum soli. Now that land was a little greener, watered by an irrigation system that the poor like him could never touch. Ruth stepped closer, her footsteps crunching on the dry stubble. She didn't look at her husband, but at the indefinite emptiness of the horizon, where the hills rolled under the scorching sun. "Samuel has started coughing again. Hannah is. The girl won't eat the thin gruel anymore. She says her throat hurts." Amos gripped the sickle handle tighter. His palms were full of calluses, yet right now they ached strangely. "Tell her to endure it. Tomorrow I'll go into the village, see if anyone needs a hired hand. Maybe the house of Herod is building something new in Sepphoris." "Sepphoris is too far," Ruth cut in, her voice holding a touch of irritability that masked deep fear. "It takes you all day to walk there, and then where will you find the strength to work? And what do they pay?" "A few silver coins that aren't enough to buy a peck of barley for the donkey, let alone for us." Amos finally straightened up, his spine popping with dry, cracking sounds. He looked at his wife. Ruth used to be a full-figured woman with rosy cheeks when they first married. Now she was just a skeleton wrapped in coarse linen, with sunken eyes and gray skin. She was only 35, but she looked as if she had lived a lifetime of hardship. "Then what do you want me to do?" Amos asked back, this verbal attack the only way to cover his own helplessness. "Pray. I've prayed until my knees are bruised. The land is still dry, and the Roman soldiers will still come at the beginning of next month to inventory the granary. Do you plan to show them this empty basket?" Ruth took a step back, her hands gripping the rim of the basket. "I didn't mean that. It's just, we have nothing left to sell, Amos. The silver bracelet Mother left. It's the last thing." "Don't mention that bracelet," Amos growled. He turned back to the pile of wheat, beginning to gather it furiously. "You can't eat that bracelet, and it won't stop a soldier from breaking my arm if I don't have enough tax for Caesar." They fell silent. The silence between them wasn't understanding. It was an abyss of unnamed pains. Amos knew Ruth was thinking about the third child they had lost last winter, a baby born blue because the mother had no milk, and the cold of the stone house with no heating coal had finished it off in just 3 days. He thought about it too, but he chose to bury his head in manual labor until his muscles went numb. Evening began to fall, dyeing all of Galilee in a pale, bloody hue. Amos hoisted the small bundle of wheat onto his shoulder and led the old donkey named Boaz toward the small house nestled under an old olive tree. The donkey walked with a limp, its back bowed just like its master's. Every step was heavy, as if it, too, were carrying the weight of the empire on its spine. When they reached the courtyard, Samuel was sitting on a rock, holding a small wooden knife, trying to whittle something. The boy was 12, but his shoulders had broadened and his hands were rough. He no longer attended the synagogue school. Reading the Torah didn't help fill an empty stomach, and Amos needed a strong pair of hands to help him dig. "Father, is there much wheat?" Samuel asked, eyes not leaving the piece of wood. Amos didn't answer. He threw the bundle of wheat onto the dusty ground. Hannah ran out from the house, her steps unsteady. She began to cough, a dry, prolonged cough that shook her small frame violently. Ruth rushed to scoop her daughter into her arms, rubbing her chest, but her eyes looked at Amos with a silent reproach. "Go inside," Amos said, his voice so tired it was barely a breath. He stood alone in the yard, looking toward the main road leading from Tiberias to the north. A large cloud of dust was rising in the distance. Not the dust of a merchant caravan, for it was too regular and rhythmic. The late afternoon sun reflected off metal objects, creating eye-stinging glints. The sound of iron armor clashing, the sound of hooves pounding on the stone road. Amos felt his heart constrict. A cold sensation ran down his spine, despite the heat of the late afternoon still lingering. He knew that sound. It was the sound of power, of occupation, and of demands that could never be satisfied. The dust cloud drew closer. Figures in red and silver armor became distinct. A squad of legionaries. Leading them was a young soldier sitting on a tall horse, his face upturned with blatant contempt. He didn't look at the villagers cowering on the sides of the road. He looked at this land like a miner looking at a vein of ore that had been mined dry, yet still trying to find a way to squeeze out the last crumbs. Amos walked into the house and bolted the wooden door, but he knew that flimsy latch wouldn't stop what was coming. He sat on the only wooden chair, hands clasped tight, tasting the bitterness of dust still lingering on his lips. Tonight, Galilee would have no peaceful sleep. The numbers in Caesar's books were beginning to stir, and every digit was written in the sweat, tears, and perhaps the blood of men like him. "Amos," Ruth called softly from the shadowy corner of the kitchen. "Hush," he cut her off. "Listen." Outside, the brazen sound of a trumpet tore through the quiet of the countryside. The voice of the Roman soldier was resonant, cold, carrying the command of a distant god in Rome, a god named Augustus, who wanted to count how many souls he owned to make sure not a single coin was missed. "People of the province, listen. By order of Caesar Augustus, a comprehensive census is to be conducted." Amos closed his eyes. He suddenly felt he was no longer a human, a father, or a farmer. He was just a name, a tax unit, a soulless number waiting to be crossed out or squeezed dry in the empire's thick parchment ledger. And this journey of suffering, in reality, had only just begun. The flickering light from the peanut oil lamp placed in the center of the table was only enough to illuminate the gaunt faces, casting giant, distorted shadows dancing on the rough stone walls. The smell of kitchen smoke was thick, pungent, mixed with the damp, moldy scent of a house long unrepaired. In that cramped space, the only sound was the wooden spoon hitting the bottom of the clay pot, making dry thud, thud noises. Ruth ladled spoonfuls of thin gruel into 4 chipped bowls. It wasn't exactly porridge. It was water boiled with a bit of leftover wheat bran, dotted with a few withered lentils. She divided it evenly, but when she reached Amos's bowl, her hand hesitated for a beat. She stealthily scooped a bit more of the thickest part from the bottom of the pot into her husband's bowl, then quickly leveled her own portion into Hannah's bowl. Amos stared at the cloudy water in front of him. He didn't pick up his spoon. His fingers, already cracked and covered in dust from the afternoon, drummed nervously on the time-worn wooden table surface. "Eat, Amos," Ruth said softly, her voice like dry leaves rubbing together. "You need strength. Tomorrow, we have much to figure out." Amos looked up. He didn't look at his wife, but at Samuel. The boy was eating ravenously, his skinny shoulders hunched as if afraid someone would snatch his meager portion. Samuel didn't look at his father. Since the census order was announced on the village road, the boy had become strangely sullen. His eyes, which should have held the innocence of age 12, were now just 2 deep, dark pits reflecting the harshness of reality. "Father," Samuel spoke suddenly, his voice raspy, "they say we have to go back to Bethlehem. That's very far, isn't it?" Amos felt a cold jolt run down his spine. Bethlehem, the land of his ancestor David, the place his clan had left 3 generations ago to seek a living in this region of Galilee. Now, Rome wanted them back there, not to reunite, not to worship, but to be counted like sheep in a pen before being sheared. 5 days' journey, Amos replied curtly. If the donkey holds up, if the weather doesn't get worse. "What do we have to travel with?" Samuel continued asking, his eyes now boring straight into Amos, a look demanding a truth the father didn't want to face. "The wheat is ruined. We don't have enough tax money. Do you intend to let us die on the road?" "Shut your mouth, Samuel," Amos shouted, his hand slamming down on the table, making the oil lamp wobble. Hannah started launching into a violent coughing fit. She doubled over, the cough tearing through the silence, sounding like rotting wood being snapped. Ruth hurriedly hugged her daughter, bringing the bowl of water to the girl's lips. "Stop it. The boy is only asking what we are all thinking. Don't take it out on him." Amos took a deep breath, trying to suppress the anger flaring up, an anger not directed at his son, but at his own helplessness. He stood up, walked toward the dark corner of the house, where a small sack was tied tight with hemp rope. He dragged it into the light. "This is our hope for the next season," Amos said, his voice trembling. "Seeds. The best wheat grains I saved from the last harvest. I intended to sow them when the first rains came." Ruth shot up, her eyes wide with horror. "No, Amos, you cannot touch that. If we eat the seeds, what will we live on next year? We will lose the remaining field entirely. The creditor will come and take Samuel as a slave to pay the debt." "Then what do you want me to do?" Amos roared, his voice lower this time, but full of power and bitterness. "Let us starve right here under this roof before the Roman soldiers come to drag our corpses out for failing to pay the registration tax." "Bethlehem isn't a choice, Ruth. It's a sentence. If we aren't there, we are outlaws. They will burn this house. Do you want Hannah to die in the ashes?" Ruth sank to the floor, her gaunt hands clutching the edge of the table. She began to cry, sobbing wordlessly, only tears rolling down her gray cheeks. Hannah, seeing her mother cry, also began to whimper, her tiny hands clutching her mother's shirt. Samuel stood up, walked to the sack of seeds. He knelt, used his wooden knife to slit a small line in the sackcloth. Pale yellow wheat grains, plump and fuller than what they had just eaten, spilled out onto the dusty floor. "I won't go be a slave," Samuel said, his voice so cold it made Amos shiver. "I will work, I will walk." "Father, use these seeds, sell them for water for the donkey, or to bribe the soldiers at the checkpoints. I don't need a future if I don't survive past next week." Amos looked at his son. He saw in the boy's eyes not noble sacrifice, but a terrifying callousness. Rome had not only taken their land, it was taking the souls of the children, turning them into pragmatic and ruthless creatures before they even knew how to love. "Tomorrow," Amos said, his voice softening but filled with the fatigue of a man who has surrendered to fate, "I will take these seeds to the village market. Maybe Simon the innkeeper will buy them. He always needs good seed for his farms in the south." "He will squeeze you on the price," Ruth said through her tears. "He knows we are desperate. He will only pay a third of the real value." "A third is still better than nothing," Amos replied. He sat back down in the chair, feeling every muscle in his body ache. "We need to prepare provisions. Some warm clothes, some dry bread, and water. Lots of water. The road through the Jezreel Valley will be scorching by day and freezing by night." Dinner ended in a silence heavier than when it began. Hannah had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, occasionally hiccuping in her dreams. Samuel gathered the spilled grains from the floor, carefully putting them back into the sack as if they were precious gems. Amos stepped out onto the porch. The Galilee night sky was full of stars, but they were distant and cold, offering no comfort. From the village, the laughter of Roman soldiers still echoed, mixed with barking dogs and the weeping of some family that had also just received the bad news. He suddenly recalled his grandfather's words about a time when the Jewish people didn't bow to anyone, about a land flowing with milk and honey. Those stories now sounded like nonsense fairy tales for madmen. Amos's reality was an empty stomach, the coughing of his daughter, and the fear of a future where he was just a number crossed out in Caesar's tax book. Suddenly, heavy footsteps approached his house. Flickering torchlight appeared from behind the olive grove. Amos stood up abruptly, gripping a length of wood, leaning against the wall. "Who goes there?" he asked, voice full of caution. "Open the door, provincial," a young, arrogant voice rang out. It was Gaius, the young soldier Amos had seen that afternoon. He was with two other soldiers, their iron armor clanking together, creating dreadful noises in the dark. Amos walked down to the yard, heart pounding in his chest. "What is it?" "The census order has already been announced." Gaius stopped in front of Amos, the torchlight casting on his tanned face, and a half-smile full of clear disdain. He looked around Amos's impoverished house, then stopped at the old donkey Boaz standing in the stable. "You forgot one thing, peasant," Gaius said, tapping the hilt of his sword lightly. "Caesar's order is free, but our effort to bring the order to this backwater is not. I call it a notification fee. Every household must pay 2 denarii. Right now." "2 denarii?" Amos gasped, his voice breaking. "That is what we eat on for a whole month. I have no money. You saw my harvest." Gaius took a step forward, closing the distance between him and Amos. The smell of cheap wine and horse sweat assaulted Amos's nose. "I don't care about your harvest. I care about my books." If there is no money, I will take something equivalent." He glanced toward the door of the house where Ruth and Samuel were standing huddled in the shadows, their eyes full of fear. Gaius's gaze lingered on Samuel for a long moment, making Amos feel his blood boil. "Stay away from my family," Amos said, his voice low and trembling with restraint. Gaius laughed loudly, a dry laugh. "Are you threatening a soldier of Rome? Interesting. All right, I'll give you a chance. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rises, bring 2 denarii to the guard post at the edge of the village. If not—" He fell silent for a moment, then leaned close to Amos's ear, whispering, "Caesar doesn't just like counting living heads. He also likes counting broken ones. Do you catch my drift?" The squad of soldiers turned and left, leaving behind acrid torch smoke and fear enveloping the small house. Amos stood rooted in the yard, hands clenched so tight his nails dug deep into his palms, blood seeping out, but he felt no pain. He turned to look inside the house. Ruth had collapsed to the floor. Samuel stood there holding the wooden knife, staring in the direction the soldiers had disappeared. In the dark night of Galilee, Amos realized the journey to Bethlehem was not a journey to find roots, but a flight from the claws of a monster that never knew satiety. And he, a father, a husband, had nothing left to protect his family but the seeds he had just decided to sell. "Amos," Ruth called, her voice shattering. "Pack the things," Amos said, his voice cold as stone. "We leave as soon as the sky lightens. Not waiting for tomorrow. Not waiting another minute." He walked into the house grabbing the sack of seeds. Their future, their harvest, their hope. All of it now just soulless wheat grains, ready to be sold to buy survival through a long, dark night under the boot of the empire. The morning mist in Galilee brought no cool relief. It was thick, carrying the salty taste of earth and the foul smell of anxious humanity. Amos stood before the wooden door of his home, trembling hands clutching the rusted iron key. This was the house his father had built, where he had carried Ruth over the threshold on their wedding day, and where he had buried his unfortunate little child under the olive tree in the back garden. He looked at the lock, then down at his hands. These scars, these calluses belonged to this land. Now he had to lock it all away. "Ready, Amos?" Ruth's voice rang out, choked. She was already seated on the back of old Boaz, one arm holding Hannah, the other clutching the cloth sack containing a few ragged clothes and some dry bread. Hannah was asleep, her wheezing breath regular in a worrying way. Amos didn't answer. He inserted the key into the lock, turned it with a dry grind. The click sounded like a finishing gunshot. He didn't remove the key immediately, but pressed his forehead against the rough wood, feeling the morning chill seep into his skin. He was locking away 15 years of life, locking away dreams of a bountiful harvest, in exchange for a journey he knew for certain would hold only loss. "Let's go, Father," Samuel said, the boy's voice cold. He stood beside the donkey, holding a long stick, eyes staring blankly toward the village road. He didn't look back at the house even once. For Samuel, this house was no longer a home. It was a trap that had sprung, and now they were trying to escape. They began to walk. Boaz's hooves struck the gravel road with a crunch, blending into the sounds of dozens of other families also shuffling away from their homes. The whole village was like a body being dissected, streams of people flowing out from alleyways like gray blood, all pouring onto the main road leading out of Nazareth. When they reached the edge of the village, the air became stifling. A makeshift guard post had been erected with sharp wooden stakes. Two red flags of the Roman legion flapped in the morning breeze, looking like open wounds against the gray sky. And there, standing in the middle of the road with unconcealed arrogance, was Gaius. He no longer wore the heavy armor of the previous evening, but just a red cloak over a polished leather breastplate. His hand rested lazily on the hilt of his sword, eyes scanning the trudging line of people with the disdain of a shepherd counting a flock of scabby livestock. "Halt!" another soldier shouted, lowering his spear tip right in front of Amos's donkey. Boaz startled, backing up, nearly causing Ruth to fall. Amos stepped forward, shielding his family. He felt his heart beating so hard it hurt his chest. "I came to pay the notification fee." Gaius raised an eyebrow, stepping closer. He looked at Amos, then down at the sack of seeds Amos was carrying on his shoulder. "Oh, it's the stubborn farmer from last night. Do you have the 2 denarii? Amos lowered the sack to the ground. The sound of the wheat grains shifting sounded painful. "I don't have cash." "But this is the best seed in Galilee. Simon the innkeeper offered 3 denarii for them, but I brought them here for you. Take it and let us pass." Gaius used the tip of his iron-toed boot to kick the sack lightly. He smirked. "Do I look like a wheat merchant?" "I need silver, not this bird feed." "This is all I have," Amos said, his voice dropping, almost pleading. "If you don't accept it, we will have nothing to pay tax with when we reach Bethlehem. Do you want Caesar to receive wheat or dried corpses along the road?" The crowd behind began to murmur. Small curses, the crying of children woken by the delay. A scarred centurion standing nearby shouted, demanding silence. Then approached Gaius. "Gaius, don't waste time," the centurion said in Latin, but Amos could understand the impatience in the tone. "We need to clear this road before the sun gets high. This rabble will clog the whole valley." Gaius shrugged, looking at Amos one last time. "Fine, since my captain is in a hurry. I'll take this sack, but don't think this is over. This is just the fee for you to be allowed to leave the village. At the Jezreel checkpoint, you'll need something of value if you want to keep your donkey from being requisitioned." He signaled for a subordinate to drag the sack of seeds away. Amos watched the sack of wheat, his family's future, tossed into a foul corner next to the guard post like an old toy. He felt a part of his soul was thrown there, too. "Move!" the guard shouted, using the spear shaft to jab hard into Boaz's flank. The animal let out a pained cry, staggering past the barrier. Amos's family officially stepped out of the village. The road ahead appeared, stretching long and covered in red dust. It was the road leading down to the Jezreel Valley, a vast strip of land usually green but now looking like a battlefield of poverty. Thousands of people from all neighboring villages were pouring in. Old ox carts screeched on the stone road. Old men dragged their feet with bamboo canes, and mothers walked barefoot, backs bent under heavy bundles. The sound of iron armor from Roman cavalry patrolling along the stream of people rang out steadily. Thud, thud, thud. Each sound was a reminder that they were not traveling. They were being escorted. They were prisoners of an administrative system with no heart. "Father, want some water?" Samuel asked, handing the skin to Amos. Amos took it, but when he opened the stopper, he saw less than a third left inside. He looked ahead. The sun began to rise over the Moab hills, glaring red and fierce. The heat would soon descend, scorching these exhausted people. "Save it for Hannah," Amos said, handing the water skin back to his son. He looked at Ruth. She had pulled her shawl over her face, revealing only red-rimmed eyes. She didn't look at him, didn't look at the road. She looked into nothingness. "We'll be fine," Amos lied. It was the biggest lie he had ever uttered in his life. They walked for about 2 miles before seeing the first signs of collapse. By the roadside, an elderly man sat with his head on his knees next to a broken cart. No one stopped to help him. Everyone looked straight ahead, eyes vacant, feet moving mechanically. Suffering had turned them into selfish creatures. In this race for survival, compassion was a luxury item no one could afford. Suddenly, a squad of Roman cavalry rushed from behind, the thunder of hooves forcing the crowd to scatter to the thorn-covered sides of the road. A woman who didn't move fast enough was knocked into a dry ditch. The leading soldier didn't bother to look back. He just shouted a command in Latin that Amos guessed meant, "Make way for the army." Amos tightened the grip on the donkey's rein, pulling it close to the rock face. He saw Samuel looking at the cavalryman with a sharp gaze. The boy's hands gripped the wooden stick so tight his knuckles turned white. "Don't look at them, Samuel," Amos whispered. "Head down." "Why must we bow our heads, Father?" Samuel asked, his voice no longer that of a child. "We did nothing wrong. This is our land." "Our land," Amos repeated, tasting the bitterness of dust in his mouth. "Our land now belongs to those who count it, Samuel, and we are just numbers being counted. Remember that if you want to survive to Bethlehem." The sun was high now, radiating a sweltering heat. The red dust road of Jezreel began to shimmer, creating wavering mirages in the distance. Hannah began to wake and cough. Her cough blended with the sound of Roman chains, creating a mournful soundtrack for the first day of the journey. Amos walked on, every step heavy as if he were dragging the locked house behind him. He didn't know what awaited ahead, but he knew one thing. The gentle farmer in him had died at the village guard post, along with the discarded sack of seeds. Now there remained only a fearful traveler, trying to keep his family from being crushed under the boot of the empire. The sun had reached its zenith, radiating a stark white light, scorching the fine layer of dust on the road leading into the Megiddo way station. This was the intersection between Galilee and the Jezreel Valley, an administrative bottleneck where every caravan had to pass for temporary travel papers. The air here was thick with the smell of human sweat, livestock urine, and tar from military chariots undergoing repairs. Amos led Boaz along the edge of the road, where mud from a rain the previous night hadn't yet dried, forming a sticky, black strip of earth. Hannah had become delirious with heat, her head slumped on Ruth's shoulder, dry, cracked lips peeling in pale flakes. Samuel walked behind, his eyes never leaving the red tents of the Roman legion erected close together like open graves. "Stop at the white line!" A piercing shout rang out. Amos startled and stopped. In front of him was a long wooden table where a local scribe sat writing under the supervision of 2 legionaries. One of them, ironically, was Gaius himself. He had ridden past the caravan at some point and was now standing there, holding a short leather whip, tapping it against his bronze-greaved shin. "Name?" the scribe asked, voice dry as sandpaper. "Amos, son of Eli, from Nazareth," Amos replied, voice hoarse. The scribe flipped through the parchment book, his dirty finger sliding over crooked Latin lines. "Paid exit fee." "Good, but you haven't paid the notification fee for the official census copy. 2 quadrants. Amos felt a rush of heat to the top of his head. I paid a sack of seeds at the village post. They said that was enough to go to Bethlehem. Gaius stepped forward, the leather whip in his hand stopping its rhythm. He looked at Amos with the amusement of a cat toying with a mouse that has a broken leg. "You're mistaken, farmer. That sack of seeds was to pay for my mouth having to read the order to you. This is the fee for the copy you must carry on your person. Without it, the next checkpoint will treat you as a fugitive. And you know what they do to fugitives." He signaled to the soldier next to him. That one sneered, drawing his gladius a short way out of its sheath. The sound of metal on metal was sharp, causing Ruth to shudder and hug Hannah tighter. "I have no more money," Amos said, his lips trembling. "I really have nothing left." "You took it all." "Search him," Gaius ordered, voice cold. Two soldiers lunged in. They not only ransacked Amos's cloth bag, but also tipped over the basket on the donkey's back. Dry bread scattered into the mud. Hannah's ragged clothes were torn. Samuel tried to rush forward, but Amos grabbed the boy's shoulder, squeezing so hard his fingers dug into the flesh. "Don't, Samuel," Amos whispered, teeth clenched. Finally, a soldier found a small cloth bundle hidden in Amos's belt. He yanked it hard, snapping the leather cord. Inside were 4 bronze quadrans, the last coins Amos had intended to use for water and medicine for Hannah along the way. The soldier handed the money pouch to Gaius. He tossed them in his hand, listening to the clink of metal. "Oh, turns out you still have a reserve fund. Did you intend to deceive Caesar's representative?" "That is money for medicine for my daughter," Amos said, voice breaking with desperation. "Please, take 2 and return 2 to me." Gaius looked at Hannah, then at Amos. A malicious smile bloomed on his lips. "You want the money? Fine. I am a generous man." He suddenly flipped his hand. 4 bronze coins fell, but not into Amos's hand. They fell straight into the sticky black mud puddle right at Gaius's feet. The coins sank into the foul muck, leaving only tiny indentations. "Pick them up," Gaius said, voice full of contempt. "Pick up all 4, and I'll let you keep 2 for medical fees. But if one is missing, I'll take your donkey to cover the crime of deceit." The whole space seemed to freeze. The crowd behind fell silent. Only the wind whistling through olive leaves and Hannah's soft coughing remained. Amos looked down at the mud. He saw his own reflection, a ragged, hunched man now about to kneel before his enemy. He glanced at Samuel. The boy was looking at him. His eyes held not a single tear, only a cold resentment, a profound disappointment in the father who was once a hero in his eyes. He looked at Ruth. She had turned her face away, shoulders shaking. Amos took a deep breath. The salty taste of tears and the bitter taste of humiliation mixed in his throat. He slowly lowered his knees. The cold, slimy mud seeped through his thin trousers, touching his skin. It smelled of decay. Amos put his hands into the mud, groping. His finger touched something hard, sharp. He hooked it up, a black coin covered in muck. Gaius laughed raucously, grinding the tip of his boot onto the back of Amos's hand. "Faster, farmer. I don't have all day to watch you play with mud." Amos said nothing. He continued groping. The second coin. The third coin. Mud had gotten under his nails, stinging. Every time he lifted a coin, the soldier's laughter rang out like knives stabbing into his self-respect. When he got to the 4th coin, it was deep under Gaius's heel. Amos had to put his hand right next to the soldier's hobnailed boot. He could see dried blood clinging to the iron studs on the sole. Gaius deliberately pressed his foot down, pinning Amos's hand against the gravel beneath the mud. "Does it hurt?" Gaius whispered, leaning down low. "This is the price of counting heads, Amos. Caesar needs to know who you are, and you need to know where your place is." Amos clenched his teeth until he thought they would shatter. He didn't make a sound. With a final effort, he slid his finger under the boot sole, hooking out the last coin. He stood up, covered in mud. 4 coins lay in his trembling palm, looking less like money and more like bone fragments of a shattered life. Gaius casually picked the 2 cleanest coins from Amos's hand. "Good. Consider it paid. Now get lost before I change my mind." Amos backed away, clutching the remaining 2 coins. He didn't look at Gaius, didn't look at the scribe. He turned back to the donkey, trying to reorganize the scattered items. Samuel approached, but the boy didn't help him. He just stood there, looking at the mud stains on his father's knees, with a face terrifyingly mature. "Father," Samuel said, voice as flat as a dead lake, "I will never kneel like that." Amos froze. He wanted to say something, wanted to explain he did it to protect them, to keep a little money for Hannah's medicine so they could go on. But words choked in his throat. He realized that, in that mud puddle, he hadn't just lost his honor, he had lost his son's worship. "Let's go," Amos said hoarsely. They continued the journey, leaving the Megiddo stop to enter the Jezreel Basin. The road was wider now, but also lonelier. Other travelers looked at Amos's family with pity, mixed with fear. They saw in Amos their own image in the near future. Numbers trampled, souls squeezed dry. Ruth moved closer to Amos, lifting her sleeve to wipe a smudge of mud from his face, but Amos brushed it away. He didn't want comfort. He wanted to keep this pain, this smell of rotting mud, to remind himself that he was still alive, however shameful that life was. Hannah started coughing again, the fit longer and heavier. Amos looked at the 2 coins in his hand. 2 bronze coins. They could buy a little herbal remedy for the cough, or a jar of clean water. But they couldn't buy back Samuel's gaze, nor erase the marks of the Roman boot on the back of his hand. "We need to sell the silver bracelet," Amos said, looking straight ahead where the red dust road stretched to the horizon. Ruth froze. She reached up to touch the silver bracelet hidden under her cloak. It was the only keepsake from her mother, the only thing left from a time when they weren't numbers. "Amos, you promised. Promises don't feed Hannah," Amos cut in, voice cold as ice. "And promises don't stop soldiers from breaking our heads. At the next checkpoint, they will demand more than 2 quadrants. We need cash. Lots of cash." They walked in silence. The clink of chains from a patrol far away echoed back, sounding like Gaius's mocking laughter still lurking in the wind. The Jezreel Valley appeared before them, vast and cruel. A giant stage where Rome played out its drama of power on the blood and bones of nameless people, and Amos's family were just extras trying to survive until the curtain fell. The makeshift market at the edge of the Jezreel Valley was a black hole of despair. Under tattered tarps and dry palm fronds, hundreds of families were stopping, trying to barter whatever remained for water, bread, or simply information about the road ahead. The smell of intense human sweat mixed with livestock dung and kitchen smoke from small fires kindled with dried manure. Amos stood leaning against a dead olive tree, staring at Ruth's hands. She was sitting on a flat rock, left hand gripping her right wrist, where the intricately carved silver bracelet of old Bethlehem lay hidden under the drab cloak. It was the only thing still shining in this world full of mud and ash. "Give it to me, Ruth," Amos said, voice flat, without a hint of pleading. Ruth looked up at her husband. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from smoke and chronic lack of sleep. "This is my mother's." She kept it through 2 revolts, through the leanest seasons. "It is the only thing for Hannah to know who she belongs to when we are gone. If there is no medicine, Hannah won't be alive to know who she belongs to," Amos retorted, every word like a dagger. He pointed to the corner of the tent where Hannah lay, head on the cloth bag. The girl didn't cough audibly anymore. Only wheezing, painful breaths remained, her tiny chest heaving with difficulty. Samuel sat next to his sister, holding a wet rag to her forehead, but his eyes were staring at his parents' conversation. "You promised to keep it," Ruth whispered, voice breaking. "You said we would find another way." "What other way?" Amos stepped forward, bending low so his face was inches from his wife's. He could see his reflection in her watery eyes, a man with a gaunt face, stubble, and the eyes of a beast cornered. "Look around. Does anyone here give us anything? Or do you want me to go back to that guard post, kneel down again to pick up a few more quadrants from under that soldier's feet?" Ruth shuddered. She slowly loosened her hand. The bracelet appeared, tarnished by sweat, but still exuding a noble air out of place in this ruin. She took it off, moving slowly as if peeling away a layer of her own skin. When the bracelet left her wrist, Ruth felt a cold jolt run up her arm, as if the last link to the past had been severed. Amos snatched the bracelet. Its weight in his palm was strange, lighter than he thought, yet pressing on his conscience like a 1,000-pound rock. He didn't look at his wife for another second, turning to walk toward the center of the market, where a fat man named 𝐂𝐴𝐚𝐴 sat on a colorful rug, surrounded by scales and leather money pouches. "Pure silver?" 𝐂𝐴𝐚𝐴 asked, eyes not leaving the bracelet as Amos placed it on the rug. "Bethlehem silver." "From my grandfather's time," Amos replied, trying to keep his voice from shaking. The merchant picked up the bracelet, brought it close to his eye, then suddenly brought it to his mouth and bit down hard. The sound of teeth on metal was gruesome. He spat on the ground, face expressionless. Old silver. Lots of impurities. Scratched in many places, too. "I can only pay 10 denarii. 10. Amos gasped, hand clenching into a fist. "It's worth at least 30. The carving alone. You can't eat carving, farmer." 𝐂𝐴𝐚𝐴 cut him off, lazily brushing the bracelet aside as if it were trash. "See the line of people out there? Every hour, 10 bracelets like this are brought here. Silver is losing value, but bread and medicine are rising. 10 denarii, or take it elsewhere to worship." Amos looked at the bracelet. He saw the tiny olive leaf patterns Ruth's mother had said were symbols of peace. Peace? What a ridiculous word. He thought of Hannah, thought of the 2 copper coins in the mud, and thought of the Samaria road full of checkpoints ahead. 12, Amos bargained, voice weak, and a packet of cough herbs for a child. 𝐂𝐴𝐚𝐴 looked at Amos for a moment, then nodded slightly. He reached into a leather bag, counted out 12 tarnished silver coins, throwing them clattering onto the rug. Then he tossed a small cloth packet containing dry, pungent-smelling grass. Amos picked up the money and medicine, feeling like he had just sold his wife's soul. He returned to the family. Ruth still sat there, empty hands on her lap, staring into space. Samuel had stood up. He saw the money pouch in Amos's hand. "How much did you get?" Samuel asked, voice flat, emotionless. "Enough to get us through Samaria," Amos replied, avoiding his son's gaze. He handed the herbs to Ruth. "Brew this." The merchant said it would help break Hannah's fever. Ruth took the packet without a word. She stood up, trudging toward the small fire. Samuel stepped up to Amos, voice lowered, just enough for father and son to hear. "Mother will never forgive you." "I don't need forgiveness," Amos growled, turning to his son. "I need you all to survive." "Do you understand? Survive." "Survive how?" Samuel asked back, eyes boring deep into Amos. "By kneeling in mud, by selling mother's keepsake. If that's the only way to live, I'd rather—" "Rather what?" Amos interrupted, raising his hand to slap his son, but stopped when he saw the coldness in the boy's eyes. Samuel wasn't afraid of him. He no longer looked at him as a respectable father. He looked at him as an accomplice to this suffering. Amos lowered his hand, turning away. He felt a terrible loneliness engulf him. He had done everything for them, yet those very actions were pushing them away. Just then, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd. It was Reuben, the neighbor with the field next to Amos's in Nazareth. Reuben looked 10 years older since Amos last saw him in the village. His beard and hair were white, covered in road dust, and his cloak was so torn it barely covered his thin shoulders. "Amos," Reuben called softly, voice shaking. "Reuben, you going to Bethlehem too?" Reuben nodded, lips trembling. "I have to. They took my son at the Jezreel checkpoint. Said he was old enough to be a construction laborer for Herod in Caesarea. Dragged him away right in front of me, Amos." Amos felt his heart constrict. He glanced at Samuel. A new fear washed over him. Samuel was only 12, but tall and strong. If the Romans needed manpower— "Don't take the main road through Samaria," Reuben whispered, leaning close to Amos, eyes darting around fearing soldiers. "There's a centurion squad named Lucius setting up a checkpoint in the valley. He doesn't just demand money, he demands bodies. He says road tax can be paid in blood or labor. Many haven't made it past that post." Reuben took a dry crust of bread from his pocket, broke it in half, and gave Amos a piece. "Take it. I don't have much, but we are neighbors. Don't let them see you have money. Hide that silver well, Amos. Out here, money is a curse." Amos took the bread, feeling this rare kindness as another burden. Reuben left soon after, disappearing into the shuffling crowd, leaving Amos with a new anxiety. That night, Amos's family slept curled up beside the donkey Boaz. Hannah had taken the medicine and drifted off, breath seeming a bit smoother but forehead still burning. Ruth lay with her back to Amos, her breath hitching as if trying to suppress sobs. Samuel sat guard, holding the wooden stick, staring into the darkness of the Jezreel Valley. Amos lay on his back, clutching the bag of 12 silver coins hidden in his shirt. The cold coins pressed against his skin, reminding him of betrayal, of humiliation, and the lost bracelet. He looked up at the night sky. The stars still sparkled, cold and distant, offering no comfort. Tomorrow they would enter Samaria. Tomorrow they would face Lucius, violence, and the truth that they had nothing left to sell. Phase 1 of the journey had ended by wiping out the past. Now they were merely biological entities, numbers that felt pain, advancing into the heart of the Empire's shadow. Amos closed his eyes but couldn't sleep. Every time he closed them, he saw the bracelet being bitten by 𝐂𝐚𝐽, and the crunch of silver sounded like human bones being crushed under a Legion boot. The road through the Jezreel Valley was no longer a path. It had transformed into a thick, trudging, foul-smelling river of people. Red dust rose from thousands of footsteps, forming a murky cloud that clung to hair, skin, and burrowed deep into the lungs of the travelers. The sun hung high like a red-hot nail, driven straight into the tops of the exhausted people's heads. Amos walked beside Boaz, hand gripping the reins until his knuckles turned white. His eyes were red from lack of sleep and fine dust, but he dared not blink for long. He feared if he closed his eyes for even a second, this reality would swallow him whole. Up on the donkey, Ruth sat motionless as a limestone statue. She wrapped her shawl tight, revealing only lifeless eyes looking at the space ahead. She didn't look at Amos. Since the silver bracelet disappeared into the smuggler's hands, a wall of ice had formed between them that the valley's scorching heat couldn't melt. "Hannah, drink some water, okay?" Amos spoke up, voice like stones grinding together. Hannah didn't answer. She lay slumped in her mother's lap, head lolling to the side. Her lips were no longer pink. They were gray and cracked into deep, bleeding fissures. Ruth remained silent, just tightening her embrace a little, an instinctual act to hold on to the last bit of life slowly cooling. "Give me the water skin, Samuel." Amos turned back. Samuel didn't hand it over immediately. The boy looked at the goatskin hanging at his hip, then at his father, a look devoid of respect, containing only cold calculation. Only a little left. "If you drink, Hannah will have nothing for the night." Amos felt a rush of heat rise to his throat. He didn't know if it was anger or humiliation. "I told you to give it here. I'll just wet my lips to speak." Samuel jutted his chin, tossing the skin toward Amos. He caught it, feeling its terrifying lightness. He opened the stopper, intending to lift it to his lips, but stopped when he saw Ruth shudder slightly. He sighed, stoppered it, and hung the skin on the saddle. The taste of dust in his mouth was now bitterer than gall. "Ruth," he called softly, "when we reach the way station ahead, I'll use the silver to buy more clean water. The kind in clay jars, not the murky stuff from these dry roadside wells." Ruth still didn't look at him. "Does that silver buy anything else?" she asked, voice horrifyingly flat. "Can it buy back my mother's memory, or just buy us a few more days of humiliation?" Amos ground his teeth. "I did it so Hannah lives. Do you understand?" "I understand." Ruth turned, looking straight into his eyes for the first time. Her gaze was sharp as a knife blade. "I understand that under the Roman boot, we sell everything for a breath, but don't call it saving a life. It's trading humiliation for existence." Amos intended to retort, to talk about the pragmatism of survival, about how he had to kneel in the mud, but a sound from behind extinguished any intended words. Thud, thud, thud. The sound of hooves pounding the rocky road rang out, steady and powerful. The crowd began to panic, people shoving each other to the thorn-covered sides. A squad of Roman cavalry appeared, leading a luxurious chariot covered by purple silk curtains, the color of the empire, the color of absolute power. Make way for the governor," the soldiers shouted, spear shafts slamming into anyone slow to move. Amos hurriedly pulled Boaz close to a steep rock face. He used his body to shield the donkey and Ruth. The chariot swept past, fast and strong. Bronze-rimmed wheels ground over stones, kicking up a giant cloud of red dust over Amos's family. In a brief moment, when the carriage curtain blew up, Amos caught a glimpse of a stout man in a pristine white robe, holding a cluster of juicy grapes. The person didn't even glance out the window. To him, the trudging line of people outside weren't human. They were dust motes, invisible numbers in a ledger he would tally upon arrival. The convoy passed, leaving behind air thick with dust and the smell of expensive horse manure. Hannah started coughing, a limp, violent cough that doubled her over. Then she suddenly went limp in Ruth's arms. "Hannah! Hannah!" Ruth screamed, voice breaking. Amos rushed over, catching his daughter. Her face was pale, eyes rolled back. He laid her on the red dust by the road, ignoring other travelers pushing past. "Water! Samuel, give me water!" Amos yelled. Samuel ran over, hands trembling as he opened the skin. Amos poured a little water into his palm, patting Hannah's face gently. She didn't wake immediately. It took a long time after Ruth continuously rubbed the child's skinny chest for Hannah to sneeze and begin breathing wheezily again. "We can't go on in this heat," Ruth said, breathing fast. She looked at the crowd sweeping past them like ghosts. No one stopped. No one asked. Everyone was carrying their own cross, and they didn't have the strength to look at another's pain. Amos looked at the sky. The sun showed no sign of cooling. He looked down at his hands, now stained the red of Jezreel earth. He suddenly understood a bitter truth. On this road, they weren't just losing assets, they were losing connection to humanity. They were being crushed by a giant machine that the people in the carriage didn't even know existed. "Stand up," Amos said, voice cold. He lifted Hannah back into Ruth's arms. "We have to go on. If we stop here, we'll die of thirst before dark." Samuel stood up, looking toward the chariot convoy now far away, just a blur of dust on the horizon. The boy spat a mouthful of dusty saliva on the ground. "One day, Father—" He let the sentence hang, but his eyes held a hatred so mature, Amos felt a chill. They continued walking. Amos's steps were heavier, sinking deeper into the red dust. He felt the bag of 12 silver coins in his shirt heating up, burning his skin. He had sold the bracelet to buy life, but the Jezreel sun was proving there were things money couldn't buy. Dust continued to fly. It clung to teeth, eye sockets, turning everyone into clay figures. The numbers in the census book were marching, and with every passing mile, a few numbers were crossed out by hunger, thirst, and the brutal indifference of the world. "Amos," Ruth called softly as they passed a dried donkey carcass by the road. "What?" "Don't buy water with that silver," she said, eyes still straight ahead. "Keep it. I feel we will need it to buy something more expensive than drinking water." Amos didn't ask what. He just nodded, tightening the old donkey's rein. He knew she was right. On this road, death was cheap, but life was increasing in price with every step. The heat in Jezreel was no longer a weather phenomenon. It was a living entity, an invisible monster slowly sucking the lifeblood from travelers. The sky was cloudless, cruelly blue like a giant bronze mirror reflecting the sun's incineration onto the red earth. Amos felt his tongue like a piece of dry leather, stuck to the roof of his mouth. Every breath carried the salty taste of dust and the smell of withering. He glanced at Hannah. The girl no longer fussed, which was the most terrifying sign. She lay motionless on the donkey, eyes squeezed shut, dried nosebleed streaks caking her cracked lips in pale flakes. "Stop here," Amos said, voice just a raspy hiss. Ahead was a makeshift stop, really just a tattered tent pitched beside an old stone well. A pot-bellied man in a worn tunic, but with shifty, cunning eyes, sat on a wooden stool, splashing a ladle of cold water on his face to taunt the passing wretches. Amos led Boaz closer. The smell of cool water rising from the well made the old donkey stretch its neck, nostrils flaring. "How much for water?" Amos asked, hand unconsciously moving to touch the money pouch in his shirt. 12 denarii, 12 pieces of Ruth's soul. The water seller glanced over Amos's ragged appearance, pausing at the donkey and the woman sitting on it. He sneered, revealing yellow teeth. 1 denarius for a clay jar, water from the deep vein, cleaner than Caesar's tears. 1 coin? Amos gasped, anger sobering him slightly. In Nazareth, a denarius buys a whole sack of barley. Are you selling water or blood? In Nazareth, you can drink rainwater if you want, the seller replied nonchalantly, dipping the ladle into the water jar, splashing sparkling drops onto the dusty ground. But in this Jezreel, water is life. You don't buy, the person behind will. Look there, the line is long. Amos turned. True to the man's word, hundreds of people were trudging closer, eyes burning with thirst at the sight of the well. "Don't buy, Amos," a weak voice came from behind. It was Reuben. The old neighbor was sitting flat under the shade of a large rock, legs swollen and covered in dried blood. "He's a land pirate. 3 more miles. There's a small stream at the foot of the hill." "Hannah won't last 3 more miles, Reuben," Amos replied, voice holding utter despair. He looked at Ruth. She was silent, gaunt hands unconsciously rubbing her wrist, where the bracelet used to be. She didn't look at the well. She looked into the void, as if this burning thirst couldn't touch her anymore. Amos took a deep breath, reaching into his shirt. The cold silver coins touched his skin, reminding him of betrayal. He pulled out 1 denarius. It sparkled in the sunlight, looking lost between his muddy fingers. He threw the silver coin on the wooden table. The sharp clink of real silver rang out, cutting and painful. The seller snatched the coin, bit it, then grinned. He pushed a small clay jar toward Amos. "Here, drink your fill. You're a man with foresight." Amos took the jar. It was freezing cold, a luxurious chill. He didn't drink. He brought it to Ruth, lifted it to Hannah's lips. When the first drops touched the girl's lips, she shuddered, eyes opening with difficulty. Hannah drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, soaking into the ragged clothes. "Drink, Ruth." Amos offered the jar to his wife. Ruth looked at the water, then at Amos. Her eyes were full of disgust. "This water tastes of silver, Amos. I can't drink it." "Stop the madness," Amos snapped, shoving the jar into her hands. "You want to die here? Leave Hannah motherless in this valley. Drink." Ruth took the jar, took a small sip, then handed it back to Amos. She said nothing, but Amos could see her shoulders shaking. He knew what she was thinking. 1 denarius, 1/12 of the bracelet, 1/12 of all remaining to their family. Amos drank the rest. It was sweet, but going down, it left a bitter aftertaste, the bitterness of impotence. He looked at Samuel. The boy stood watching the water seller with a face full of hatred. "Father," Samuel said, voice lowering, "why must we pay for water from this land?" "Because this land is no longer ours, son," Amos replied, wiping water from his chin. "It belongs to the man with the sword, and the man with the sword allows these robbers to tax us." He walked to Reuben, giving the old man the few drops left at the bottom. Reuben finished, exhaling sharply. "Thank you, Amos. But be careful. Reuben whispered, glancing toward the southern horizon where a large dust cloud was rising. "I heard at the Jezreel checkpoint ahead, Roman soldiers are starting to collect road tax in silver. They know people are carrying money to pay census tax back home. They won't let you pass with 11 silver coins left." Amos felt his heart tighten. 11 silver coins. That was all they had to survive the remaining 4 days, to rent a sleeping place in Bethlehem, and to pay Caesar's tax. If they lost this money, they would truly become ghosts. "They can't take it all," Amos said, trying to reassure himself. "They can do whatever they want," Reuben replied, voice mournful. "You saw this water seller. He is one of us, yet crueler than the Romans. Poverty turns men into wolves, Amos, and we are sheep being butchered piece by piece." Amos looked back at the seller. He was counting copper and silver coins in a wooden box, whistling a cheerful tune. Around him, other travelers knelt, begging for leftover water, but he ruthlessly splashed water on the ground to drive them away. "Let's go," Amos ordered the family. They continued the journey. Amos's steps were heavy now, not just with fatigue, but with fear. Every time someone passed, his hand unconsciously went to cover his chest where the money lay. The brief wealth, 11 silver coins, had turned him into a man constantly anxious about being robbed. Hannah seemed more alert after drinking, but the fever didn't break. Samuel walked beside the donkey, stick in hand, eyes constantly scanning the dry bushes on both sides. The boy was no longer a child. He had become a young warrior in a war for survival he never wanted. The sun began to wane, dyeing the Jezreel Valley a deep blood red. In the distance, the watchtowers of the Roman checkpoint appeared, cold and menacing in the twilight. Amos knew tonight would offer no peace. The first denarius was gone, and with it a fragile hope for a smooth journey. He looked at Ruth, seeing her still rubbing her bare wrist. He suddenly realized even if they reached Bethlehem, paid the tax, and survived the return, that silver bracelet would never come back. This suffering didn't just take material things. It eroded their souls, turning them into fragmented pieces, like the shriveled wheat grains on the old field in Nazareth. 11 coins, Amos whispered in the dark of his mind. 11 coins to buy the lives of 4 people. Will it be enough? The night wind began to blow, carrying the biting cold of the plateau. Amos's family trudged toward the checkpoint where Roman torches burned like the eyes of demons waiting for prey. The Jezreel checkpoint appeared like a gray bruise on the red background of the valley. It was a system of iron-reinforced pine barriers erected right at the narrowest bend of the arterial road. 2 towering wooden watchtowers stood tall on either side, where Roman archers lazily leaned against railings, scanning the flow below like watching a line of ants crawling into a trap. The smell of the guard post was a nauseating mix: damp leather, rusting iron, and the pungent odor of horse sweat mixed with livestock dung steaming in the heat. Amos felt his throat tighten every time a shout in Latin rang out from ahead. Each scream was a moment the crowd froze, then trudged forward a few steps in deathly silence. "Luggage open," a soldier shouted, spear shaft slamming into the side of an ox cart, making the woman standing next to it startle and drop a clay jar. Pottery shattered, water soaking quickly into red dust, leaving only a dark stain that vanished as if it never existed. Amos led Boaz closer. He could see the centurion directly running this station. It was Lucius, a man built like a block of granite, his bronze breastplate full of dents and scratches, marks of border battles. A long scar ran from under his left ear down to his neck, red and raised like a centipede crawling on skin. Lucius didn't sit. He stood leaning on the pommel of his gladius, eyes cold and soulless as dead fish. "Halt!" A guard blocked the way with a spear tip before Amos. Amos froze, gripping the donkey's rein. He could feel Ruth's hot, rapid breath right behind his back. Samuel stood aside, eyes not on the soldiers, but staring at the scar on Lucius's neck with curiosity mixed with hatred. "Where to?" Lucius spoke, voice deep and gravelly, sounding like stones grinding. "To Bethlehem." "For census registration," Amos replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He took from his shirt a parchment with the Nazareth village seal, the only proof he had paid the notification fee. Lucius didn't bother looking at the parchment. He stepped closer, the smell of sour wine and strong sweat from him hitting Amos directly. He walked around Boaz, slapping the animal's flank hard. Boaz let out a pained cry, old legs buckling slightly. "Strong donkey," Lucius said, thin lips curling into a smile devoid of goodwill. "The Legion needs pack animals for Jerusalem. I'm requisitioning it." "No, please," Ruth gasped, voice lost in terror. She hugged Hannah tight, the girl shivering in fever. "My daughter is sick. She cannot walk." "Please, Centurion." Lucius turned to look at Ruth, then Hannah. He showed no pity. To him, the sick child was just unnecessary baggage on a potential transport vehicle. "That is not my concern. Caesar's law states the army has the right to requisition vehicles during census." Amos stepped forward, blocking between Lucius and the donkey. "Sir, I paid the full fee at the village. I am just a poor farmer. If we lose the donkey, my family will die on the road." Lucius narrowed his eyes. The scar on his neck twitched. "Are you arguing with an officer of the Roman Legion?" "I am only begging for fairness," Amos said, hand unconsciously touching the money pouch in his chest. 11 silver coins. He knew it was time to use them. "Perhaps. There is a road fee to let us keep this donkey." Lucius was silent a moment. He looked at the pouch Amos was hiding, then around. Other soldiers were busy searching others, no one paying attention. 2 denarii, Lucius whispered, voice lowering but full of authority, "in exchange for the donkey's freedom and the safety of your head." 2 silver coins, Amos exclaimed. "That is too much." "I paid." Smack! Lucius's punch was so fast Amos didn't see it coming. The bronze sword pommel slammed straight into Amos's lower jaw. He felt electricity shoot through his brain, the salty taste of blood filling his mouth, and the world suddenly tilted. Amos collapsed into the red dust, ears ringing, hearing only Ruth's heart-rending scream and Samuel's growl. "Father." Samuel rushed forward, but another soldier used a spear shaft to knock the boy aside. Lucius bent down, using the tip of his hobnailed boot to step on Amos's trembling hand. He pressed hard, driving gravel into the flesh. "Who do you think you are to bargain with me? Here, I am the law. I say 2 coins. It's 2 coins. Either I take the donkey and I let my men have a little fun with your wife to cover your insolence." Amos lay on the ground, seeing Lucius's boot right in front of his eyes. He saw dried mud, old bloodstains on the leather. He felt humiliation burning him fiercer than the pain from the face wound. He glanced at Samuel. The boy was pinned down, face dusty, but eyes burning with a flame of hatred Amos had never seen. Don't hurt them," Amos wheezed through bloodied teeth. He shakily reached into his shirt, pulling out 2 denarii. The sparkling silver coins were now smeared with blood from his hand. He placed them on the ground, right at Lucius's feet. Lucius picked up the 2 coins, blew the dust off, and pocketed them. He removed his foot from Amos's hand, signaling the soldier holding Samuel. "Let the kid go. Let them pass." The soldier released Samuel. The boy scrambled up, rushing to help Amos. Ruth also got down, kneeling beside her husband, using her cloak to wipe blood from his face. She didn't cry. Her eyes were dry and held a deep hatred for the entire world. "Go before I change my mind," Lucius said, turning back toward the watchtower as if completing a normal transaction. Amos tried to stand with Samuel's help. His head was still spinning, and every step made the jaw wound throb. He led Boaz past the iron barrier. The sound of chains hitting wooden posts sounded like fate mocking him. They walked a few hundred yards out of sight of the post before Amos stopped by a dry bush. He collapsed, vomiting a mouthful of bruised blood. Samuel stood by, hands clenched, knuckles white. "Father," Samuel said, voice shaking with restraint, "why didn't you fight him? You have my wooden knife, you have strength." Amos looked at his son. He saw disappointment, the collapse of an idol in the 12-year-old's eyes. "If I fought, Samuel, you would have no father, your mother, no husband, and Hannah would die at that post. Rome doesn't fight individuals. It crushes families." "I hate them," Samuel whispered, voice cold as ice. "I hate everyone in iron armor. One day I will make them kneel like you just did." "Don't say that," Ruth snapped, hugging Hannah tighter. "Don't ever say that, Samuel. We just need to survive to Bethlehem. Don't bring more disaster on this family." They looked at each other in silence. The silence in Jezreel Valley at dusk was terrifying. It brought no peace, only the stifling feeling of unshareable pain. Hannah began coughing softly, dry, weak sounds. Amos looked at the money pouch in his shirt. 9 denarii left. The 2 lost coins weren't just money. They were 2 miles of safety, 2 meals, hope for better medicine for his daughter. "We must find shelter for the night," Amos said, voice breaking. "Rain is coming." On the Samaria horizon, black clouds were gathering, blocking the last light of day. The wind began to blow hard, carrying mountain chill and the smell of a brewing storm. Amos's family trudged into the enveloping darkness. Amos felt the wound on his face swelling, the pulse in his jaw matching his heavy steps on the red dust road. He had kept the donkey, kept his family alive, but he knew after every checkpoint like this, a part of his old self died, leaving a soulless corpse being led by Caesar's numbers into the void. Samuel walked last, occasionally glancing back at the Jezreel post where Roman torches still flickered, burning like never-healing scars on the body of this land. Samaria rain brought no life to the fields. It brought only rot and bone-chilling cold. Heavy gray drops fell from a leaden sky, turning the red dust road of Jezreel into a sticky quagmire, clinging to feet like ghostly hands trying to pull them underground. Amos walked, every step a struggle with the slush. His lower jaw had swollen up, bruised purple and hot, making it impossible to close his mouth completely. The taste of iron from dried blood lingered on his tongue, mixed with the salt of rain. He couldn't speak. Every facial movement sent a jolt of pain through his brain, blurring his vision. But that physical pain was nothing compared to Samuel's gaze nailing into his back. Samuel walked behind, head low but eyes burning with a strange light under the soaking wet headscarf. He no longer helped his father lead the donkey. He walked alone, gripping the wooden stick he had sharpened to a point. He was looking at Amos's hunched back, at the blood seeping through his father's torn cloak, and in his mind the image of the protector father had shattered into irreparable fragments. "Stop. Amos, please," Ruth wheezed. She sat on Boaz, arms clutching the cloth bundle containing Hannah. The girl no longer shivered from fever. She was shivering from cold. The thin cloak was soaked, plastered to her pale skin. Amos froze, feet sinking deep in mud. He turned, trying to open his mouth, but emitting only a choked groan. "The girl, she can't breathe," Ruth said, voice lost in the pouring rain. She opened the cloak. Hannah's face was cyanotic, lips pale, breath coming in short. Interrupted gasps. Samuel stepped closer. He didn't look at his sister with the usual pity. He looked at Hannah as another victim of the system that had broken his father. He touched her forehead, then abruptly pulled back. "Father let this happen," Samuel said, voice terrifyingly flat. He didn't scream, didn't blame, but that calmness was crueler than any insult. Amos looked at his son through the blurry rain. He wanted to explain, wanted to say he had sold his honor for 2 silver coins to keep the donkey for Hannah. But the swollen jaw stripped him of the right to defend himself. He could only stand there, mud up to his ankles, a cripple in both body and soul. "Go. On." Amos tried to force out each word, fresh blood oozing from the corner of his mouth. They dragged on for a few hundred yards before Hannah started a new coughing fit. Unlike the dry coughs before, this sounded deeper, heavier, as if something was breaking inside the tiny chest. Hannah doubled over, and then a streak of dark red fluid sprayed out, staining a patch of Ruth's cloak red before falling into the black slush below. Blood. Ruth went still. She looked at the blood on her hand, then down at the mud where the red was quickly being diluted by rain. A silent scream choked in her throat. She looked up at the sky, at the indifferent clouds pouring water on their heads. No God answered. No miracle appeared. Only the rain and the labored breathing of the old donkey. "We need herbs," Samuel said, eyes staring at the blood trail in the mud. "There's a Samaritan village ahead. I see firelight. They won't help us," Ruth sobbed. "They hate Galileans. They'll chase us away like lepers." "If they don't help, I'll take it," Samuel replied, gripping the wooden stick. Amos shivered. He saw in his son's eyes not fear anymore. It was the recklessness of someone with nothing left to lose. Rome had taught Samuel an early lesson, that justice doesn't exist, only power and seizure. He had tried to protect his child from violence, but his own impotence had pushed him into violence's arms faster than anything else. They continued toward the flickering light in the distance. The road sloped up, muddy and full of rocks. Amos felt his lungs burning. Every step, the swollen jaw throbbed with his heartbeat. He saw the silhouettes of low stone houses emerging in the rain. A Samaritan village, a place where religious and ethnic hostility was sharper than Roman blades. They stopped before a small house isolated at the edge of the village. Dim light from a peanut oil lamp spilled from the door crack. Amos intended to step up and knock, but Samuel was faster. He stepped up, using the stick end to pound hard on the door. Bang! 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 "Open up!" Samuel screamed. The door slowly creaked open. A middle-aged man, face tanned and wrinkled with hardship, looked out. He wore a worn cloak, holding an oil lamp. Seeing Amos's family, ragged, covered in mud and blood, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Galileans, what are you doing here?" the man asked in a cold tone. "My daughter, she is dying," Ruth pleaded, holding Hannah out to the light. "Please, give us a little cough herb, just a bit of warmth." The man looked at Hannah, at the blood on Ruth's clothes, then at Amos, the man with the deformed face standing shivering in the rain. A flicker of pity appeared in his eyes, but was quickly replaced by fear. "Go," he said, voice trembling. "Roman soldiers passed through here this afternoon. They ordered no harboring of census travelers. If they come back and find you here, they'll burn my house. I have my own family to worry about. You are Samaritan. You worship God too." Ruth screamed through the rain. "God doesn't pay my taxes, and God didn't stop the Romans from breaking my son's neck," the man replied, starting to close the door. "Go, find a cave on the hill. Don't bring disaster here." The door slammed shut. The wooden bolt sliding home sounded sharp and cruel. Samuel stood there, stick in hand. He didn't cry. He turned to look at Amos, a faint, bitter smile on his lips. "See, Father, even people like us don't care. Only the strong survive. You knelt for them, and this is the result." Amos couldn't answer. He collapsed into the cold mud. He felt like an exhausted old donkey, waiting for the final sword stroke to end the suffering. He looked at Hannah, at Ruth, and at Samuel, the son slowly turning into a dangerous stranger. The rain continued to fall, blurring all boundaries between Samaria and Galilee, between life and death. In the darkness of the black night, Amos's family trudged away from the village light, heading toward the desolate hills, where only cold stone and the howling wind of Samaria awaited them. Hannah's blood trail on the mud had been washed completely clean by the rain, as if it never existed, just like their existence in Caesar's books. Just a number that could be crossed out any time without a trace. The rain didn't stop. It shifted from heavy drops to a mist of fine, biting spray, soaking through layers of linen, penetrating to the marrow. The Samaritan hills appeared under lightning flashes like giant stone monsters bearing teeth. Amos's family sheltered in a narrow rock recess under an ancient olive tree where roots surfaced like withered veins. Amos sat leaning against the cold rock wall, breath ragged. His lower jaw was now so swollen it deformed his face completely, one eye squeezed shut into a small red slit. He watched Ruth trying to use her own body heat to warm Hannah. The child lay there, breathing wheezily like a hammer hitting an old anvil. Every time Hannah coughed, pink fluid bubbled at the corner of her mouth, soaking into Ruth's wet clothes. "She's going, Amos," Ruth whispered, voice void of tears, holding only a chilling emptiness. "She's getting cold." Samuel stood at the cave mouth, staring into the rain. The boy said nothing, but his hands gripped the sharpened stick. He suddenly turned, looking at his father, the man helpless in pain, then out toward the trail leading up the hill, where a solitary lamplight had just appeared. "I'll be back," Samuel said, voice cold as rain. Amos tried to reach out to stop him, but a violent pain shot from his jaw to his skull, dropping him to his knees. Samuel had rushed into the rain before anyone could react. The boy ran like a cornered beast, mud splashing up, legs purple with cold. The light came from a low stone hovel where a man named Abner was trying to reinforce his wooden door against the storm. Samuel stopped a few steps away, raising the sharp stick. "Medicine! Give me medicine!" Samuel screamed, voice whipped by the wind. Abner started, the lamp nearly falling from his hand. He saw a ragged child, face muddy, eyes burning with madness. He wasn't afraid of the wooden stick, but he feared what lay behind the child, the desperation that could turn a soul into a demon. "Get lost, Galilee brat," Abner shouted, but his voice shook. "I told your father. Nothing for you here. Romans are camped in the valley below. If they see me supplying census people, they'll hang me from that olive tree. My sister is dying." Samuel stepped closer, stick tip pointing straight at Abner's chest. "You have medicine. I smell pine resin and sage from your house. Give it, or I burn this hovel." Abner looked deep into Samuel's eyes. He saw there the image of his own son, a child who died of drought and lack of medicine 2 census seasons ago, when Rome took every last grain to feed the army. Ethnic hostility between Samaritan and Galilean faded before a shared pain, a shared scar named empire. "Hush! Shut your mouth!" Abner hastily grabbed Samuel's shoulder, pulling the boy against the dark rock wall. "You want us all killed?" He looked around, breathing hard, then disappeared into the hovel. A minute later, Abner returned, holding a small cloth packet and a steaming clay jar. "Take it," Abner whispered, shoving the medicine into Samuel's hand. "Olive leaves crushed with wild honey and pine resin. Give her this water, then put the leaves on her chest. It helps the lungs stop wheezing." Samuel froze, the stick slowly lowering. "Why? Why help?" Abner looked at the dark sky where lightning still tore the space. "Because Caesar doesn't distinguish Samaritan blood or Galilean blood when counting tax money. We are all numbers waiting to be erased, boy. My son died of a cough like this. Don't let your sister share the fate." He pushed Samuel away. "Run. Don't come back. And if caught, you never saw me. Understand?" Samuel nodded, stuffed the medicine in his shirt, hugged the warm jar, and dashed back to the cave. When he arrived, Hannah had started convulsing. Ruth was sobbing, hands helpless. Amos saw his son return with warm water and medicine, a ray of hope flashing in red eyes. He tried to help Ruth lift Hannah's head. Samuel carefully poured spoons of bitter herbal water into his sister's mouth. Hannah choked, coughed up fluid mixed with blood, but then her breathing began to ease. Pine resin and honey seemed to soothe the devastation in the child's lungs. Ruth applied the herbal leaves to Hannah's chest, warmth from the clay jar spreading in the cramped cave space. Hannah groaned no more. She sank into a heavy but more stable sleep. The family huddled together. Amos looked at Samuel. The boy sat at the cave edge, eyes staring into the rain, hand still gripping the stick. He was no longer the son who laughed, who asked Torah stories. He had become a guardian, a product of brutality. "Father," Samuel spoke, voice low and raspy. "He said we are all numbers. Is that true?" Amos couldn't speak. He could only raise a trembling, wounded hand to stroke his son's head. He wanted to say no, that they were God's children, souls of value. But looking at reality, the broken jaw, the dying daughter, the hostile Samaria land wrapping them in fear, Amos realized Abner's words were the naked truth. That night, amidst the Samaritan hills, Amos's family survived the storm thanks to the stealthy kindness of an enemy. But that salvation brought no peace. It only deepened the bitterness in their hearts. They realized compassion in this world had become contraband, traded in shadows. Under threat of death, far away, thunder from Mount Ebal still rumbled like the mocking laughter of Roman gods. The journey to Bethlehem was still 2 days away, and every mile to come would be even more costly. Amos looked at Hannah, then at the pouch of 11 silver coins. Coins now seemingly heavier than a mountain, for he knew to keep them until the end, he might have to pay with something even more precious than silver. Jerusalem did not welcome them with trumpets or holiness. It welcomed them with the stench of garbage, thick coal smoke, and the chaotic noise of an economic bottleneck being strangled. As Amos's family approached the northern gate, the road was no longer the Samaria quagmire, but a churning river of people, merchants on camels laden with silk, patrolling Roman soldiers on horses with shining armor, and thousands of ragged travelers pouring into ancestral towns to serve the census. Amos led Boaz close to the stone wall of a row of roadside inns. His jaw was less swollen but skewed to one side, making his face look like a horrific twisted mask. Every cold gust from the Census Valley felt like a knife slicing an open wound. He looked at Hannah. Abner's medicine was only a temporary painkiller. Now she was fading again, pale skin under the flickering city torches looking like melting wax. "We need a roof, Amos," Ruth whispered, shivering in the plateau night cold. "Just one night. A kitchen corner is fine." Amos looked at the golden Olive Inn. Through the half-open wooden door, warm yellow light spilled out, carrying the scent of lamb stewed with onions, making Amos's stomach knot in pain. He reached into his shirt, touching the silver bag. 9 denarii, 9 last pieces of soul. He led the donkey to the door. A fat man in expensive blue linen robes stood leaning in the frame, holding a grease-dripping lamb chop. It was Simon, the innkeeper, famous for judging people by their purse. "Full up, farmer," Simon said before Amos could speak. He took a huge bite, grease running down his chin. Amos tried to force words through the painful jaw. "I have silver. 1 coin. For a floor corner. Warm the child." Simon stopped chewing. He narrowed his beady eyes, scanning Amos's ragged state, pausing long on the deformed face and the death-scented child on the donkey. He wiped grease from his lips with the back of his hand, gold rings sinking into fat fingers glinting in the torchlight. "1 denarius, Simon sneered, showing yellow teeth. "You know how many merchants are lining up to pay 5 for a straw nest out there? Look at you. My guests have money. They don't want to eat dinner looking at a bruised face and a dying brat like yours." "Please," Ruth got down, kneeling on the hard stone. "She is dying of cold. Just let her lie by the stove for a bit. We will leave at first light." Simon looked at Ruth, then Samuel. The boy stood behind the donkey, gripping the sharpened stick, eyes looking at Simon with a cold hatred that made the innkeeper shudder. "Hey, boy, don't look at me like that," Simon snapped, throwing the bone on the ground at Amos's feet. "Romans visit here often. 1 shout and you're in jail for threats. Get lost. Across the street, under the wall. Free for your kind." "You are Jewish too," Samuel suddenly screamed, voice cracking with rage. "You eat lamb while your brothers starve in the street." Simon turned red, stepping forward, belly jiggling. "Brothers? Don't claim kin. My brothers pay tax and make money. You Galilean rabble bring only trouble. Go before I call the guards." Amos put a hand on Samuel's shoulder, stopping him. He knew a fight here meant death. He looked at the lamb bone, at the warm light closing off. Simon slammed the door, the iron bolt sounding final. They stood there amidst the indifferent flow. Other travelers avoided their eyes like a plague. In the city, pain wasn't shared. It was isolated, so others felt no guilt. "Let's go," Amos wheezed. They led the donkey to the wall base, where dark, windy crevices housed the destitute. Dozens of families lay there, coughing, moaning, and the smell of poverty filled the air. Amos found a spot out of the wind under a stone arch. He spread the torn blanket on the cold ground. Ruth held Hannah, trying to shield her from the wind, whistling through the wall cracks. Samuel sat at the edge, not sitting but standing, leaning against rock, stick in hand, eyes on the warm light from Simon's Inn across the street. "Father," Samuel said, voice terrifyingly flat, "I'd rather be a bandit on the hills than a gentle farmer insulted by those pigs." Amos didn't answer. He sat by Ruth, feeling the cold seep into his bones. He opened the silver bag. 9 denarii. They sparkled ironically. He had sold his wife's keepsake, endured humiliation, been beaten to keep this money. But here, right next to the capital of faith, it couldn't buy a night of warmth for his daughter. Hannah began shaking violently. The fever returned with terrible intensity. She didn't cough anymore. Her lungs seemed full of fluid, every breath making a scary gurgle. "Amos, she's too cold." "Her limbs are purple," Ruth cried soundlessly. Amos looked at Simon's Inn. Through the second-floor window, he saw silhouettes toasting, laughter echoing in the dark. He realized their suffering wasn't a tragedy to the world. It was a superfluous detail, a speck of dust on Caesar's cloak. He grabbed some scattered dry straw, trying to start a small fire with scrap wood. The flickering light only illuminated their gaunt faces. Samuel stood there, a ghost of hatred growing. Jerusalem night passed in the cruel silence of stone walls. High above, Herod's palace towers shone bright, distant, and cold. Amos looked at his daughter, then his scarred hands. He had believed hard work and honest living would be rewarded by the land, but the land was stolen, and human hearts had turned to stone. The journey to Bethlehem was only one short day away, but Amos felt he stood before a bottomless abyss. The silver in his hand was heavy, not with value, but with its uselessness against the indifference of his own kind. Hannah moaned softly, bloody saliva bubbling at the corner of her mouth. Ruth held her, murmuring prayers she no longer believed. Samuel turned to look at his father, eyes burning in the dark. A fire not of hope, but of a forming destruction. Dawn in Jerusalem brought no warmth. It was a strip of gray cold, crawling over the massive city walls, illuminating the dark recesses where Amos's family had passed a sleepless night. The smell of rotting garbage and cold dampness from Census Valley clung to their soaked cloaks. Amos tried to stand, his jaw jerking in pain as if someone hammered a nail into the bone. He looked at Boaz. The old donkey stood shivering, 4 legs splayed like rotten posts driven into hard ground. Salt sweat streaks caked white on the gray, matted fur. Under the old saddle, the smell of rotting flesh rose, sores festering from heavy loads and no rest. Boaz had no strength left to cry. He just looked at Amos with cloudy eyes covered in a white film of utter exhaustion. "Up, Boaz." "Just a few more miles," Amos whispered, trembling hand stroking the dry nose. Boaz shuddered slightly, eyes unfocused. He was the only companion left from the Galilee field, the one who pulled the plow through droughts, the only entity never judging Amos's impotence. Now Boaz was surrendering. "We have to go, Amos." "The crowd is moving," Ruth said, voice hoarse. She tried to rewrap Hannah. The child was comatose, breath whistling through a narrow wind tunnel. Amos took the rein, pulled hard. Boaz took a stumbling step, hoof grinding on rock. They joined the stream pouring from Jerusalem gates toward Bethlehem. The road was steep and stony, every step torture for barefoot travelers. Around them, society operated with characteristic cruelty. Rich merchant caravans took the middle, forcing poor travelers to the dusty edges. Roman patrol soldiers on horses, whips in hand, occasionally swung to clear jams. "Move, filthy peasants," a chariot driver shouted, his cart of wine nearly clipping Amos's donkey. Boaz, startled, staggered, then suddenly buckled onto his front knees. The sound of bone hitting stone was dry. The animal fell sideways, throwing Hannah and Ruth to the ground. "Hannah!" Ruth screamed, crawling to her daughter lying motionless in the red dust. Amos rushed to Boaz. He knelt in the mud, using all his strength to heave the donkey's belly up. Get up, Boaz. You can't die here," he screamed, tears mixing with sweat and dirt running into his bitter mouth. Boaz tried to lift his head one last time. He looked at Amos, a look pleading for release. Then a long, heavy breath escaped the thin chest. Boaz's eyes slowly dimmed, head dropping to the stone. The donkey was dead. He had walked his road, leaving his master in a world with no place to stop. The crowd flowed on. They stepped over the carcass, some cursing it for blocking the way. No one stopped to help Amos lift his family. Indifference here was thick as fog. "Leave it, father," Samuel said. The boy stood there, stick in hand, staring at the carcass with terrifying coldness. "He's dead. He can't help us anymore." "He is Boaz's son," Amos gasped, voice breaking. "He is a carcass," Samuel cut in, voice flat. "If you sit here crying over a donkey, Hannah is the next carcass. Choose. The donkey or my sister?" Amos looked at his son. He saw cruelty. He never taught. It was the cruelty of one who understood that in this world, compassion was a burden that killed you faster. Samuel walked to the carcass, casually removed the luggage bags, then used the stick to push Boaz's head to the side to clear standing room. Ruth held Hannah, looking at Amos with empty eyes. She had no strength to cry for Boaz. Her pain had exceeded the threshold for feeling any other loss. Amos stood up, knees bleeding. He looked at the old donkey one last time. Boaz lay there, a pile of bones wrapped in gray skin amidst dust, just another crossed-out number in Caesar's journey. He realized Boaz was luckier. Boaz got to rest. Amos still had to carry the burden of life. "Give me the things," Amos said, voice cold. He shouldered the heaviest sack, hemp rope cutting into swollen flesh. Samuel took the other. Ruth carried Hannah. No transport left, nothing but legs and a eroding will to survive. They walked, every mile now a century. The Judean plateau sun began to burn. Amos felt his lungs fill with hot sand, shoulders screaming with pain, but he dared not stop. He knew if he stopped, he would fall like Boaz, and the stream would trample him without hesitation. Along the road, they saw others in similar straits. A young mother crying over a blue baby. An old man curled under a bush, staring at the sky. Numbers falling away. Rome wanted to count people, but the road to the count was a silent slaughterhouse. "Look," Samuel whispered, pointing to thick bushes on the hillside. Amos looked. He saw lurking shadows, watching eyes. Not soldiers. Outlaws. road bandits waiting for weak prey separated from the herd. Boaz's collapse made Amos's family a perfect target. Injured man, woman, sick child, teen, all carrying goods on foot. Amos touched the money pouch. 9 denarii. Not just hope now, but a death sentence if those men knew. "Samuel, stay close," Amos ordered. They trudged on. Bethlehem appeared on the horizon, a small village on a hill, looking peaceful. But Amos knew it was the eye of the storm. Hoofbeats from a patrol sounded behind. Amos lowered his head, trying to blend into the ragged crowd. He was no longer a farmer with honor. He was a refugee in his ancestors' land, a traveler counting his daughter's breaths, wondering if they could reach the destination before death called another name. Boaz was left behind, fading into the red dust of the Jezreel road. Amos didn't look back, but deep down he knew a part of him lay there too, under Jerusalem's walls, where human compassion was crushed under imperial wheels. The 6 miles from Jerusalem to Bethlehem were 6 miles of hell on earth. Without Boaz, Amos shouldered the entire remaining fortune, 2 sodden, dusty hemp sacks, rope bit deep, peeling skin, leaving bleeding tracks that dried into scabs. Every step was an insult to the human body. Joints crackling, the skewed jaw throbbing with the frantic heart. Bethlehem appeared on the hill like a kicked anthill. The census had turned the small village into an overstuffed sack. Smoke from thousands of cooking fires formed a black, foul cloud. Shouts of Roman soldiers directing crowds, arguments over sleeping spots, and crying children created a chaotic, headache-inducing din. "Almost there, Ruth." "Hold on," Amos wheezed, voice like crushed leaves. Ruth didn't answer. She walked like a ghost, eyes unfocused. Hannah on her back, head lolling, breath just weak whistles through slime-filled lungs. Samuel walked alongside, stick in hand, scanning roadside stalls with unconcealed hatred. They stopped before Simon's Inn, a large stone building on the main road. Simon, the fat innkeeper Amos glimpsed earlier, stood at the door with a ledger and quill. He smiled, welcoming a merchant group just dismounting, men in silk with heavy purses. Amos lowered the sack, splashing mud. He stepped close, shaking hands, pulling out 2 denarii. "Innkeeper, please, a spot for the child. She is dying." Simon stopped smiling. He glanced Amos up and down, face shifting from welcome to disgust in a breath. He covered his nose with a handkerchief, stepping back as if Amos carried leprosy. "You again? I said in Jerusalem." "No place for your kind," Simon said, voice high with disdain. "I have silver. 2 denarii for a night." Amos held up the coins, glittering pathetically in the gray sunset. Simon sneered, pointing to the merchants. "See them? They pay 10 just for the main floor. Your 2 won't cover heating wood for your filth. Get out before my guards drag you. You are of this village. You know my ancestor Eli." Amos shouted, humiliation turning to desperate rage. "We are same blood." "Blood doesn't pay Caesar, and it doesn't clean your stench," Simon replied coldly. He turned to the brawny guard. "Chase them. They spoil the guest's air." The guard stepped up, spear shaft slamming Amos's chest, knocking him back onto the luggage. Samuel tried to rush with the stick, but Ruth grabbed his arm. "Don't, Samuel, don't," Ruth whispered, tears finally falling, mixing with dust. The heavy wooden door slammed. The iron bolt sounded like a nail in Hope's coffin. Amos lay on the ground, staring at the closed door. He saw his reflection in the polished stone at the threshold, a cripple, an error code, a creature without personhood in the eyes of his kin. "Father," Samuel knelt, voice chillingly cold. "See, Mother's silver can't buy humanity. We are trash to them." Amos didn't answer. He tried to stand, but his body reached its limit. Just then, Hannah began convulsing. She doubled over in Ruth's arms, eyes rolling back, mouth foaming white and blood. "Amos! Amos! She doesn't see me!" Ruth screamed amidst the indifferent crowd. Passers-by walked on. Some glanced and turned away quickly, fearing the suffering would stick to their cloaks. In Bethlehem now, compassion was a luxury item long sold out. "We must find Eliab," Amos wheezed, clawing the stone wall to stand. "He lives south, near the shepherd's caves." Last hope. They dragged on. Darkness fell on Bethlehem, bringing cutting Judean cold. Oil lamps cast yellow beams, mocking Amos's darkness. They passed narrow alleys where other wretches huddled, waiting for a miracle that never came. Samuel walked behind, no longer looking at the road. He looked at lit windows where laughter and food smells wafted out. Hands gripped the stick until nails bled. He was counting. Not numbers like Caesar, but blood debts he swore to collect. Reaching the southern edge, Hannah went totally silent. No convulsions, but body cold as ice. Amos stopped before a simple, low stone house. Eliab's house. A distant relative Amos met once as a child. Amos used last strength to knock. 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 The door opened slowly. An old man with a long gray beard and tired eyes appeared. Eliab looked at the family, at the purple child in Ruth's arms. He sighed, a sigh holding the era's heaviness. "Amos," Eliab asked, voice shaking, "you bring death to my house now?" "Please, Eliab." "A floor spot," Amos begged. "Nothing left. Donkey dead. Seeds gone. Only this child." Eliab looked at the dark street, fearing patrol eyes. "Come in. Fast, but warn you, house full. Only kitchen corner near animals. And quiet, Romans checking every house for tax lists." They entered. Warmth and dung smell felt like heaven. But looking in Eliab's eyes, Amos saw no welcome. Only reluctance, fear, and the burden of another being squeezed dry. Bethlehem brought no salvation. Only a dark corner to watch each other die in imperial silence. Amos collapsed on the cold floor, 9 silver coins in his shirt, heavy and useless as his life. The journey ended, but the true suffering seemed to just be fully revealing itself. The stone floor in Eliab's house offered no comfort. It was hard and cold as the hearts in Bethlehem. Amos collapsed in the kitchen corner, breath ragged. The stench of cow dung and damp straw hit him, but he was too weak to care. To him now, animal smells were more pleasant than the scent of disdain from Simon's Inn. In the dim light, dozens of shapes lay huddled, packed like discarded grain sacks. Snoring, moaning, coughing filled the air. Eliab stood in the center, holding a small lamp, light revealing wrinkles and constant anxiety. "Don't block the path," Eliab grumbled. "My wife is cranky about sharing the kitchen." "We have nothing spare, Amos. Tax took all the barley." Ruth knelt, holding Hannah. The girl wasn't convulsing, but breathed in short, wheezing gasps like wind through a rotten door. "Eliab, please, warm water." Just to wipe her face. Eliab's wife, a gaunt woman with sharp eyes, stepped from the shadows. She looked at Hannah warily, then at the dried blood on Ruth. Warm water wastes wood. Wood here costs more than wine. You bring sickness. If Romans know, they kick us out to fumigate. See, Eliab, told you not to let them in. Amos tried to sit, jaw throbbing. He reached into his shirt, pulling out a denarius. It glittered in the lamplight, drawing all eyes on the floor. Deadly silence. Other wretches raised heads, eyes burning with greed and envy. Here, Amos wheezed, silver coin for warm water and gruel for wife. Eliab's wife snatched the coin, bit it, then looked at Amos less harshly but without pity. Fine. Tonight only. Tomorrow register and leave. Don't want a corpse here. She turned, steps clacking. Ruth watched the last coin leave Amos, then looked at Hannah. She said nothing, but shoulders shook. One coin, a tenth of the bracelet, now buying a ladle of warm water, and a seat in a foul kitchen. Samuel sat against the wall, stick in hand. He stared at Eliab and his wife. No fear, only deep contempt. "They are our kin, father?" Samuel asked, voice flat as frozen lake. Amos didn't answer. He closed eyes, fighting tears of shame. He remembered Galilee days when Eliab visited, drinking wine under olive trees, talking harvest. Then they were men. Now, animals fighting for scraps in a cage. Water came, not steaming. Ruth wiped Hannah's face. The girl didn't open eyes, skin pale, cold as stone. Amos touched her small hand. No reaction. Hannah had fallen into a dark zone no warmth could reach. "She can't drink any more, Amos," Ruth whispered, voice breaking. Nearby, guests muttered. A middle-aged man spat. "Hey, take the kid away." "She's dying. Don't let her breath taint us. We register tomorrow. Can't catch bad luck." "What did you say?" Samuel shot up, stick pointing at the man. "Say it again." "Stop, Samuel," Eliab shouted. "Sit. Want patrols to hear? Everyone suffers here. Don't act like you're the only victims." Samuel looked at Eliab, the man, his father. He lowered the stick, hands shaking with rage. He realized in this dark cave, no brothers, no kin, just people staying alive by stepping on others. Bethlehem night passed in suffocation. Smoke had no vent, stinging Amos's eyes. Hannah began her final breaths, wheeze fading to silence. She didn't die instantly, but she wasn't here, just a body waiting for the end. Amos lay there, looking at the black ceiling. He realized the brutal truth of the census. Caesar didn't care if they lived or died, just needed names for tax. If a name vanished before the book, just a small error in empire algebra. 8 coins, Amos thought. 9 minus 1 for contempt water. 8 to buy Samuel's future. Pay tax on lost land. Bury Hannah. Night wind whistled, carrying Roman hoofbeats. Bethlehem, city of ancestors. Now just an open grave where compassion was crushed under tax coins and indifference. Hannah hiccuped one last time. Ruth held her, not crying, not screaming. Just sat there, turned to stone in the dark, while Samuel ground the stick tip on the floor. Scritch, scritch. Tomorrow sun up, face Caesar's numbers, carrying the corpse of last hope. Dawn in Bethlehem brought no salvation. It brought the brass trumpets of the Roman legion, tearing the damp mist of Judea. The sound from the square was resonant, cruel, urging tax units to wake for final duty to Caesar. Amos stood from the cold floor. Joints cracked. He looked at Ruth, still sitting, motionless, Hannah in her lap like a half-melted wax doll. No moaning, no coughing. Breath so faint only slight vibration of wet cloth showed it. "We must go," Amos wheezed, jaw less swollen but voice distorted. "She can't walk, Amos." Ruth looked up, eyes empty. "No hope. They force everyone. If one missing, tax evasion. Arrest Eliab. Hunt us like beasts." Amos gripped her shoulder. No compassion left, only brutal survival instinct. Samuel stood at the door, stick in hand, looking at parents like an outsider. "I'll carry her," voice flat. Samuel took Hannah, shuddered at cold skin but didn't cry, shouldered her expertly like Amos carrying seed sacks. They left Eliab's, Bethlehem streets, a slaughterhouse of dignity. Thousands crowding alleys, curses, whips hitting backs, chains clanking created stifling madness. Central Square ringed by legionaries, bronze shields a wall under sun. Long tables in center, local scribes working under Roman officers. Amos's family queued 3 hours in heat. Hannah convulsed slightly on Samuel. Ruth tried to shade her. Soldier knocked hand away. "Keep line straight." "No covering," soldier shouted. Finally, Zacchae, the scribe. Thin groomed beard, silk robe, eyes glued to ledger. "Head of household," Zacchae asked, quill hovering. "Amos, son of Eli." "Nazareth," Amos replied, shaking. Zacchae flipped pages. "Amos, Nazareth. Land tax debt 2 years. Correct?" "Land confiscated," Amos ground teeth. "Confiscation doesn't clear debt," Zacchae replied, not looking. "Debt stays. Current assets? Dead donkey. 2 torn sacks. 9 silver." Amos looked at Centurion behind Zacchae. 8 silver. Zacchae scratched. Quill on parchment sounded like rodents gnawing bone. "Wife? Ruth? Children?" Amos looked at Samuel, then Hannah. Samuel, 12. And Hannah, 7. Zacchae looked up, saw Hannah, purple lips wheezing. Disgust, then gone. "Child is sick. Survive tomorrow?" "She, still breathing," Ruth sobbed. "If she dies before I close book, report to delete name. But if living, pay head tax." 1 denarius a year, Zacchae said, voice emotionless. "Name, Hannah, daughter Amos. Status, critical." Amos felt rage. Daughter dying, and he cares if she's tax object. "You tax a dying child?" Samuel spoke, voice hard. Zacchae stopped, looked at Samuel coldly. "Rome doesn't tax dead, kid. Rome taxes existence. As long as she breathes Caesar's air, she owes Caesar." "Problem with empire law?" Centurion stepped up. Amos pulled Samuel back. "No, she's a child," Amos wheezed. "Pull 2 coins. This is head tax for me and wife. Please, register so we find doctor." Zacchae took coins, cleaned them, boxed them, stamped red wax on parchment. Done. "Amos of Nazareth. You are counted." Zacchae lowered head. "Next." Amos took parchment, light but heavy as tombstone. Registered. Legal number. Paper slave. They turned to leave. Crowd shoved. Hannah hiccuped long. Samuel stopped, lowered her to dirty stone step. Hannah opened eyes. Cloudy, but momentarily saw father. Lips moved, no sound, only bloody foam. Then light faded, staring at blue sky. Hannah was dead. Died right after name entered book. Finished duty. Counted. Ruth collapsed, stroking eyes shut. Samuel stood, gripping stick, looking back at Zacchae, writing names. "They have her name," Samuel whispered, trembling hate. Took name for money, even when she had nothing. Amos stood, parchment in hand, looked at daughter, rag doll on stone. Cruel irony. Hannah died while on paper just starting to exist for Rome. "Let's go," Amos said, hollow. "Bury her before patrol charges burial fee." He lifted Hannah, light as soul flown, leaving corpse for father. They walked against flow, lonely in city, no place for living or dead without silver. Behind, Zacchae's quill scratched. Scritch, scritch. Wax stamp thudded like hammer on souls. Number added. Life taken. Sun shone, indifferent to death. Smell under Legion boot. Hannah's body was terrifyingly light, carrying her through alleys. Amos felt he held dry straw, not a body. Her arms swung lifelessly, eyes half open, staring at gray walls, seeking light in dark world. Flow continued. People dodged Amos, fearing pollution, not respecting pain. Whispers followed like flies. Stopped at Eliab's. Amos didn't knock. Stood looking at door. Ruth beside, dry red eyes. Samuel behind, stick ready, guarding like predator. Doctor opened. Eliab fearful, seeing bundle. Stood blocking frame. "Why bring her here?" Eliab asked, shaking. "Dead, Eliab," Amos said hollowly. "Need earth." Corner in ancestors' plot behind house. Eliab whispered, "Crazy, patrols checking burials. If corpse found untaxed, house confiscated. Have wife, kids. Can't risk for dead child. She is your blood." Samuel stepped up, stick near Eliab's chest. "She bears clan name. Leave her for dogs." Eliab backed up, looking at stick. Pity quenched by survival. "Blood pays no fines. Registered. Take her out. Find Hill Cave." Amos felt cold, saw relative no different from Zacchae or Simon. Parts of machine crushing kindness. "2 silver," Amos said, cold as stone. Eliab froze, calculation in wrinkles. "What?" "2 denarii. Bury in back cave. Unseen. I dig." Amos pulled last 2 coins meant for food. Eliab's wife peeked. Saw silver. Nudged Eliab. "Fine." Eliab sighed, hand reaching. "Fast. No trace. Sunset. Leave. Want no part of death." Amos threw coins on stone. Clink sounded like demons laughing. Didn't wait. Carried Hannah back to rocks. Ancestral plot just reinforced caves. Cold, moldy. Amos placed Hannah on slab. Dug with hands and stick. Nails bled. Didn't hurt. Every handful buried part of him. Ruth knelt, smoothing hair, humming Galilee lullaby. Samuel guarded, watching hill path. "Father," Samuel whispered. "God see us?" Amos stopped. Looked at hole. God busy counting others. Here, just us and stone. Hole deep enough. Placed Hannah. No linen, just rags. Covered with dirt. Ruth gasped, didn't scream. Held Amos's hand over grave. Blocked cave with rocks. Hannah lay in Mother Earth where ancestors lived in glory. She died in tax shame. Done, Amos wheezed. Retrieved bags. Eliab nervous. Done. Go. Patrol passed, checking evaders. Amos ignored him. Shouldered sack. Led Ruth. Samuel stopped. Spat on spot where coins lay. Walked away. Bethlehem, sunset, bleeding wound. Red light masking rot. Amos walked out. No Hannah, no silver. Only hate and parchment. Hooves behind. Cavalry. Centurion. Crowd parted. Amos pulled Ruth to wall. Halt! Papers! Soldier shouted. Amos' heart pounded. Squeezed parchment. Journey took daughter. Now Empire wanted double check. Numbers checked again, ensuring no soul escaped grip. The morning sun in Bethlehem brought no warmth. Stark white light illuminated the dirty square, highlighting gaunt faces. Ink smell, wet leather, fierce sweat created stifling air. Amos stood in line, legs like dry wood. Shoulders light without Hannah, but chest heavy with lead. Glanced at Ruth, holding air like Hannah was there. Eyes dead, staring at tax box, unresponsive to shoves. Ruth died with Hannah. Body standing was habit. Samuel behind, stick gone. Hands twitching, observing. Watching ink on fingers, soldiers laughing. Memorizing details like Smith choosing iron for sword. Next, Amos of Nazareth. Zaccai's voice dry clockwork. Amos stepped up. Parchment damp. Zaccai writing. Verify. Amos, son of Eli. Wife Ruth. Son Samuel. Daughter Hannah. Correct. Amos choked. Cold spine. Looked at pen. One line deceased frees Hannah. Price? 2 silver funeral tax. Inquest. Eliab arrested. Correct, Amos whispered. Betrayal of daughter in cave. Zaccai stopped, looked up. Saw Amos' face. Ruth. Where is child? Dying yesterday. Bring to check breath. Rome doesn't list corpses. Amos' heart bursting. Looked at Samuel. Boy stepped up. Calm. Sister sleeping at relatives. Too weak. You saw her. Still breathing, just no strength to cry. Zaccai stared at Samuel. Silence loud. Pen scratched ear. Smirked, knew death smell. But living name meant tax money. Good, Zaccai stamped. Hannah, daughter Amos. Exists. Family tax, 3 denarii annually. Start autumn. 3 coins. Amos felt sword in gut. Tax tripled. Hannah dead. Owed Rome forever. Here is registration. Zaccai pushed parchment. Keep it. Caught without slave. Amos took it. Ink wet. Looked at Hannah. Ghost. Peak suffering, death brings no freedom. Wait, officer voice. Centurion on podium. Judeans. Census done. To cover security. Surcharge imperial security applied. 2 quadrants per family before leaving. Crowd roared rage. 2 quadrants broke backs. Silence, sword drawn. Pay or labor camp. Amos checked pocket. 6 coins left. Lost Hannah donkey, honor. Rome squeezed last drops. Paid coins. Clink. In box like dirt on coffin. Let's go, Amos said. Left square. Flow in. Numbers counted. Bethlehem a funnel, squeezing life, leaving husks. Samuel walked, stone in hand, cutting finger. Father. Hear them. Who? Names in book. Samuel eyed soldiers. Screaming. One day names stand up. Burn city, burn Rome. Amos shivered. Samuel gone. Rome took Hannah with neglect, took Samuel with hate. Walked out, gate to Galilee. Hope gone. Return of ghosts. Carried parchment. Broken jaw. Emptiness. Behind, Zacchae wrote. Scritch. Number added. Soul chained. Parchment in hand was living monster sucking hope. Amos squeezed edges into palm, standing at North Gate. Final bottleneck, legionaries' wall of bronze. Amos looked at seal. Eagle clutching wheat. Warm wax smell like crematorium. Halt! Papers! Guard shouted. Amos stepped up. Guard took paper. Looked at Amos' face, bloodied clothes. Amos of Nazareth, 4, registered. God read. C3. Where is second child? Heart stopped. Looked at Ruth holding nothing. Hugging Private Hannah. She. Behind with kin. Amos lied, weak. Weak. Resting. Guard narrowed eyes at Samuel. Samuel staring at Seal, eyes burning. Her soul rests, sir, Samuel spoke flatly. You counted her. Paid life to Rome. What more? Guard hand on sword. Kid likes logic. False declaration is crucifixion. Amos blocked Samuel. Please, grieving child. Paid tax, security, valid papers. Guard threw paper in dirt. Valid to leave, but need exit, stamp for road. Fee, 1 quadrans each. Money again. Exhaustion. Amos pulled last coppers, hand shook, placing in iron glove. Guard spat on wax seal, stamped. Thud. Chain locked. Done. Go. Amos retrieved paper, wiped spit. Led Ruth out of grave, but air still dusty. Mile out, stopped. Amos collapsed. Looked at seal. Dirty wax wound. Done, Ruth, Amos wheezed. Counted. Legal citizens of poverty. Ruth sat, scratching seal. Wax crumbled, eagle remained. Won't go, Amos, Ruth said lucidly. Follows to Galilee. Sits at table. Hannah dead. Shadow sucks blood till we die. Amos realized. Seal not existence, but ownership. Rome owned sweat, pain, death. Not travelers, but assets moving. Samuel took paper, pocketed it. Keeping it, father. Eyes on Samaria hills. Reminder. Every coin is Hannah's blood. One day seal, not submission. Evidence of crime. Amos looked at long road. Galilee far. 4 days hungry. No seeds. Started walking. Shadows long. Amos bent. Ruth silent. Samuel stomping. Oath in steps. Seal in pocket cold. Mission done. Free family turned tax units. Steps mixed with prisoner chains music. Return to Galilee, no relief. Gray ribbon of death. Going was race. Return was struggle with rot. Amos walked, feet mashed, skin peeled, oozing, stone shocks to brain, carrying emptiness heavier than grain. Ruth walked like shadow, rocking empty arms, retreating to cave world. Silence cruel. Stop. Rest, Amos wheezed. Samuel led. Stopped. Eyes predator. Rest for what? Samuel asked flatly. Samaritans rob last 6 coins. Patrols enslave. Mother. Can't, Amos pointed. Ruth collapsed. Samuel looked. Stick planted. She bears it if you stop collapsing. Lost Hannah. Lose mother, too. Cold kills her before Nazareth. Amos felt shame, son teaching survival. Wanted to scold, saw Samuel's hands. Lost right. Bread crust, Amos fumbled, offered to Ruth. Samuel hit hand. Bread fell. Don't waste on non-eater, Samuel growled. Pocketed bread. For tomorrow, drink and move. You treat me so, Amos shocked. Treating like Rome, Samuel looked like Gladius. Rome gives no rest. You knelt, begged sister dead. Won't kneel, won't let you kill us with weakness. Amos saw stranger. Rome product, hard stone, love lost. Night crossing. Wind cold. Ruth stumbled. Samuel pulled up. Move. Past fires. Carcasses. Amos touched seal. Proof of human heaviest chain. Day 3. Jezreel view. Green Galilee faint. Trap waiting. Home, Amos whispered. No joy. Home, Samuel laughed dry. Debt field home. Empty house home. Slaves to land. Seal says owe 3 coins. Where from? Amos silent. Samuel right. Return to consequences. Tax soldiers. No future. Passed Lucius again. Didn't recognize. Amos head down. Anonymous number. Crossed barrier. Cycle of shame done. Paid God. Lost love. Day 4. Sunset. Nazareth. Olive tree gray. House locked. Ruth stopped. Screamed at house. Hannah. Where? Villagers passed. Used to pain. Legion world. Grief noise. Samuel lifted mom. Inside. Don't show weakness. Tax rises. Amos unlocked. Click. Like stamp. House dark. Empty. Amos entered. Looked at field. Amos of Nazareth. Counted. Legal. But dead body waiting burial in giant cemetery. Samuel sat. Carved mark on seal. Start again, father. Voice steel. Prepare for next count. Amos closed eyes. Saw burning seal. Hannah cough echoing. House welcomed with silence. Dust shroud. Amos cold. Ruth rocking pillow. Singing grave song. Samuel lighting fire. Knife on seal. Father, Samuel said. Morning I glean. South field scraps. Not ours. Creditor comes, Amos said. They take what they find. Samuel smiled cold. I take ours first. Rome taught speed survives. Amos placed seal on table. Evil eye. No meaning, Amos asked. Debt, Samuel said. Hannah lives to tax. Work double for ghost. Seal is brand. Amos touched skin. Journey truth. Miles walked, honor sold, child lost, for paper of ownership. Caesar Augustus ruled by pen. Under Rome, numbers. No one cares. Pay and silence. Return, not roots. Inventory check. Believed. Amos started, stopped. Justice, God, kin words broke. Don't believe. Samuel stood. Believe this, pointed at seal. No silver, die. Be stronger or crushed. Bethlehem crucified hope. Samuel slept. Ruth slept. Nightmare face. Amos alone. Lamp dying. Most lonely man. Led family to dark. Brought back mad wife. Soulless son. Wanted to burn seal. Couldn't. Become outlaw. Needed it to protect scraps. No home, just fear. Future, Samuel repeating loop. Beetle gnawed wood. Scritch. Empire counting. Amos blue lamp. Darkness. Galilee night held sigh of lost man, sharpening of boy's wood. Returned, counted, waiting to be erased. End is life sentence. Moon set, numbers curled in dark. No dawn of freedom.